Okay, hi. It's good to see everybody. Tonight is part 23 of our series on the first chapter of Sanhedrin. We are going to begin on page 11b and go on to page 12a. I will share my screen so everybody can see the text together, but if you are at some point in the future or right now desiring your very own PDF, you can email me at deborahklapper@gmail.com. Everybody who's here right now, I think, should have gotten the email earlier today with the sources, but if you didn't, by all means, please send me an email and I'll add you to the list for next time. Okay, we are still talking about the process and procedure for adding a leap month to the year. I should mention that we are presently in a leap month, in an Adar Aleph, right here in real life. And just reminding you that the way it works is that the months are defined by the cycle of the moon. The cycle of the moon around the earth is about 29 and a half days long. And so if we had just 12 months every single year, that would be 354 days in every year, and we'd fall behind the seasons by 11 days each year. And since the holidays are supposed to be connected to the agricultural seasons in the land of Israel, that would not work. So what we do is roughly 7 years out of every 19, we add an extra month, which is the first month of Adar. Okay, so we begin here. Tanu Rabbanan. Al shlosha dvarim ma'abrinat hashana. For three things we impregnate the year, and that's the word we've been using all the way along for adding a leap month, is that a 13-month year is pregnant and a 12-month year is not pregnant. And so there's three factors that we consider, and it's going to turn out we need 2 out of 3 of them. Al ha'aviv, the aviv, and we usually today think of the word aviv as meaning spring, but when we see it in the book of Shemot, right after the plague of hail, the word is used to describe the ripeness stage of the barley plant, and that seems to be what it means here. So the ripeness of the barley, ve'al perot ha'ilan, and on the tree fruits, ve'al ha'tekufa, and because of the tekufa means either equinox or solstice. In this case, it seems to mean that the fall solstice is going to happen before Sukkot. And we're worried about the barley because on the second day of Pesach, we need to bring a sacrifice, which is the first harvest of the barley. So we need barley which is ripe already by the second day of Pesach in order to do that. We're concerned about the fruit because we need to bring the first fruits from all of people's various farms in various places in Israel on Shavuot. And the rule is that Sukkot is supposed to happen before the fall equinox.
I have a question about the barley.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you're bringing the Omer during Pesach, how do you avoid chametz?
Okay, so there's 2 pieces to the answer. The first piece is that there is only one time ever that we bring chametz into the Beit HaMikdash, and that is the sacrifice of the Shtei HaLechem on Shavuot. Otherwise, all korbanot that have flour in them are pesachdik, or matzah, but they're not. Some of them are fried. They're not matzah, but they're all pesachdik. The other half of the answer, though, is that until after the time of the Gemara, I don't know exactly how long after the time of the Gemara, it was still perfectly normal to bake fresh matzah every day of Pesach, and people didn't worry about the possibility of it going wrong. we no longer bake matzah during Pesach because we're worried that the dough could get left over, stuck to something, whatever, not all go in the oven in time, and some of it will become chametz and we'll end up owning chametz on Pesach that way. But that concern doesn't start bothering people until quite a bit later than the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. And they were absolutely baking fresh mincha sacrifices in the Beit HaMikdash on Pesach. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, sure. It also seems, by the way, that the ordinary people were eating fresh barley, possibly baked into matzah or possibly just as, like kernels, toasted or maybe even raw, I'm not sure, on Pesach. As we'll see later, it seems like as soon as the Omer was brought, everybody flipped a switch and started eating the fresh barley crop, especially if there wasn't enough food otherwise. So the not just in the Beit HaMikdash, but everywhere, people were harvesting and eating fresh grain during Chol HaMoed Pesach.
I think the reference to the fresh grain was in a previous lesson when they were talking about their favorite Pesach food was roasted grain.
Yeah, I think about a year ago we saw roasted barley grains as a Pesach afternoon snack for the children, I think. Maybe for the adults also, I don't remember. That theoretically could have been fully cooked before the prohibition on chametz appeared. Right. Theoretically, we could still do that now if it weren't for the fact that we've decided that we're not going to risk eating grain on Pesach except to actually eat matzah. But it seems like they were cutting fresh plants that were still growing, definitely not yet cooked, and grinding them and cooking them on Pesach, as we'll see. In any case, okay, so al shnayim mehen me'abrin, you can you make it a leap year if we have 2 out of 3 of the barley, the fruit, and the equinox. But if we only have 1 of the 3, then we do not make it a leap year. But if barley is one of the 2 out of 3 that we're deciding based on, that makes everybody happy. Because if it's not one of the 2 out of 3, the reason that would make people unhappy is that it means that you have to have a leap year because the fruit's not going to be ready and the equinox is going to be before Sukkot, but the barley is going to be overripe by the time you get around to Pesach, which means that the Omer sacrifice itself isn't going to be of ideal quality. But more importantly, you got hungry people who are going to sit around looking at food saying, wow, that food really ought to be kosher and it's not yet, and I'm hungry, for a whole month before it becomes kosher to eat the food. And that's going to make people miserable. So that's why we're happy if the development of the barley crop works out so that it is done just in time for it to be permitted to eat. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer af al hatkufa. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says this was said, or it was sorry, not af al hatkufa. This was said about the equinox. Problem is we don't know what he's talking about because the Gemara asks Ivayalahu tkufa smichin. He said, wait, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, do you mean that they're happy if the equinox is the thing that people that we decide based on? Which Rashi suggests is because if the seasons are going to line up properly, then it won't be so cold when people are walking home from Sukkot. It won't be raining yet. Whereas if you have to make a leap month because of the agricultural products, but the equinox didn't require it, Sukkot's going to be super late in the fall. And by the time everyone's walking home from Yerushalayim, they're going to get soaked in the rain. So people will be unhappy about that. Or, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, did you mean that the equinox is by itself enough to declare a leap month? Unfortunately, by the time it occurred to them to ask him, they were just, talking about what he meant, and he was long dead. And we don't know. We don't know. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said something about something in the Breita being supposed to be about the equinox, but we don't know what it was. Okay. Next Breita. Tana Rabbanan. Al Shlosha Aratzot Ma'abrian Tashana. So there are 3 parts of the land of Israel that we consider when we're making the decision about whether to have a leap year. Although, of course, as I should have mentioned at the beginning, the way that our calendar works is that it was decided in advance using astronomy and arithmetic about 1,800 years ago, and we're no longer making decisions year to year and haven't been in a very, very long time. But in the time of the Gemara, this was still just barely live, or at least it's being live was still a memory. Okay, so these 3 regions are Yehuda, Ever HaYarden, and Galil. Yehuda is the area around Yerushalayim and just to its south. Galil is further north, where around the Kinneret, which I guess is why in English the Kinneret is known as the Sea of the Galilee. And the Ever HaYarden is the space which is now occupied by the Kingdom of Jordan on the other side of the Jordan River. Al Shtayim Mehen Mabrin, as we will declare a leap year if 2 out of those 3 regions require it, meaning if the barley and the fruit in 2 out of 3 of those places are not ready yet. V'alachad mehen ein mabrin, but for one of those 3 regions, we're not going to declare a leap year. Ubizman sheYehuda achad mehen hakol smechin, and when the region of Yehuda, of Judea, is one of the places that is going to need the extra month in order to be ready for Pesach, then everybody's happy. She'ein Omer ba elam Yehuda, because, and literally it says the Omer has to come from Yehuda, but the truth is that that's not the halacha. The halacha is ideally the Omer comes from Yehuda, but whatever, the Omer is supposed to come from Yehuda, and so if Yehuda is one of the regions that's the reason why we're making the leap year, then its barley is going to be ripe at the right time, and if it's not, then its barley was ripe a month ago, and we're going to have to travel to the Galilee to cut barley for the Omer. Tana Rabbanan, Ein ma'abrian tashana ela b'Yehuda. So the next Breita says that now we're not talking about how to make the decision, but where to make the decision. So the court that meets to decide whether to declare a leap year has to meet in Yehuda. V'im ibruha beGalil me'uber. But if they declared it a leap year in the Galil, it is a leap year. And so for this, it's important to know that the Sanhedrin was for quite some time in several different towns in the Galil. And so it's possible that they stood up and, walked 50 miles south and sat down again and made their decisions about the calendar. But that's what would have been necessary, because after the Sanhedrin moved from Yerushalayim to Yavne, which is more coastal, I think. But then eventually it moves north to the area around Tiberia and Tzfat, and it's there for a while. So at that point, this must have been an issue. Hanania ish Ono testified. He'id Hanania ish Ono im ivruha begalil ena me'uberet. So Hanania ish Ono testified that his teacher said that it doesn't work if you declare the leap year in the Galil. It's still not a leap year. You gotta do it again in Yehuda, or it doesn't work. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, my Tama de Chanina ben Ish Ono. So Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, wants to know, why does Hanania ish Ono think it does not work in the Galil?
Deborah, what is it about Ibor Hashana that they're even commenting? What is it about it that makes it region dependent?
So,
and I thought it was just supposed to be done around the Beit HaMikdash.
So in terms of the agriculture, I think they're growing regions for different kinds of crops. In terms of where the court meets, it's hard to know why regions would matter. The argument that we're going to make in a second for Hanania Ish Ono certainly sounds like it's an argument about Yerushalayim specifically, and possibly even an argument about the Temple Mount itself. For the first position in the Breita that said you're supposed to do it in Yehuda, and if you can't do it in Yehuda, then it works in the Galil. There, it might just be, like the closer you can be to where you're supposed to be, the better, and it might be more of an aesthetic thing. For Hanania Ish Ono, I'm actually not convinced that he does allow it if it's elsewhere in Yehuda, besides in Jerusalem. But let's read his argument, and then you can tell me if you agree with me.
Okay.
Okay, so he's got a pasuk in Devarim Yud Bet. Devarim Yud Bet, pasuk Hey. And this is in the context of telling Bnei Yisrael to destroy all of the idolatrous stuff that they're going to find in Canaan when they get there. And then it says, Lo tasun kain la'Hashem Elokechem. Don't do like this to Hashem your God. Ki im el hamakom asher yivchar Hashem Elokechem mikol shiftechem lasum et shmo sham. Because instead, to the place that God will choose from all of your tribes to put his name there, L'shichno tidrashu vatashama. Seek his home and come there. And the pshat of that pasuk mostly seems to be the Canaanites are, worshiping in everybody's backyard and worshiping idols, and you shouldn't do either of those things. You should only worship Hashem, and you should have a centralized place that you go to. You want to bring a sacrifice, go to the place that God's going to choose and bring it there. But the Gemara says, "Kol drisha tadoresh lo yu ela b'shichno shel makom." Any drisha that you doresh, which I'm not translating on purpose, but I'll come back to that in a second, has to be in God's home. And drisha has it has at least three meanings. One of them is the meaning that seems to have been the pshat in the pasuk, to seek, like to go looking for something. Another one is to interpret the Torah, right? Like as in when somebody gives a drasha in shul. And the last one, which I think is the one that we're trying to tap into here as part of our interpretation, is to cross-examine a witness. So, which the Torah describes as drisha and chakira. So I think what he's saying is that all of your court procedures, all of your witness interviews have to happen in God's home. Now, he obviously doesn't mean that you can't have a court system anyplace else in the country. We obviously do have regional courts. We talked about them before. So there's going to have to be some kind of limitation on which kinds of court proceedings have to take place in God's home. But let's just say that something of national import, I don't know, whatever category he's talking about is going to have to be in God's home. And the thing is that, like I said before, the pasuk appears to be talking about Yerushalayim specifically, and maybe about the temple itself. That's usually what it's talking about when it speaks of God's home in the place that God is going to choose, right? It doesn't usually mean the region of Judea. It usually means the Temple Mount, or at least Yerushalayim. So I think that it may be that Hanania Ish Ono isn't going to allow you to declare a leap month in Beit Shemesh either, or in Efrat, or whatever. He's going to require it to be done in Yerushalayim. But I didn't find anybody directly addressing that issue in the inadequate research that I did on the subject.
Deborah, just remind me, for Ibor Hashanah, they didn't collect and investigate witnesses, right? There were no Eidim the way there were for Ibor HaChodesh.
So
it was the Beit Din that decided, and the only question that we learned was what was the number of judges who needed to sit on the Beit Din.
We haven't had any details about the procedure for interviewing witnesses, but somebody has to be providing them with information about the condition of the roads and the condition of the bridges, which we talked about last week, and about the condition of the ovens in various places in Yerushalayim, about the state of the barley and the different kinds of fruit in all the different regions of Israel. I mean, I guess it's possible that the judges are actually traveling everywhere and like walking onto people's farms and looking at their peaches, but it seems much more likely that they're sitting there in one place and sending and collecting evidence from people who come and tell them.
Uh-huh.
It's hard to picture that they're collecting all of this evidence without interviewing witnesses.
But they don't go into a lot of detail about it the way they do about Ibor HaChodesh, where there's tremendous detail.
My guess would be that the exact standards for exactly what constitutes evidence might be a little bit less well documented, or looser, or both.
Yeah.
But I don't. That is not an area of expertise of mine. I do not know for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So our next Braita is about time. Tanu Rabbanan. Ema Briant Hashana Ela Bayo. You can only declare a leap year during the day. Bim Ibruha Balayla Ina Meuberet, and if they declared it at night, then it didn't work. And it's worth mentioning that that is generally true of almost everything that the Beit Din does as a formally constituted Beit Din. They're only supposed to be practicing during the day. And those of you who were here, I don't know, a month and a half ago or so, when we were talking about the wording of the Mishnah and it being weird for it to talk about Ibor Chodesh, about impregnating months instead of impregnating years. So here you can see what the language is normally supposed to look like. Right, so we're talking about impregnating years, and then we're talking about sanctifying months. This is the normal language that the Gemara was surprised it didn't find in our Mishnah. You can't sanctify, you can only sanctify the month during the day. And if they tried to sanctify it during the night, that doesn't work. And so now we need to derive that. Amar Rabbi Abba, Mikras. Or Rabbi Abba says, what is this pasuk? Tiku b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom chagenu. You might recognize this pasuk because we use it as part of our kiddush on Rosh Hashanah, and also in the davening. Right, blow the shofar on the new moon, at the month. In the covering of the day of our holiday. That's weird. I should admit that if you look up the word keseh in the BDB, it will tell you, and BDB, while being a dictionary of the Hebrew Bible, is distinctly Christian. So there are cases where we have a very particular tradition about something means, and they don't. And I think this is one of them. They will tell you that Keseh is a phase of the moon, and in particular that it's a full moon, which is really interesting because here it very, very clearly, the Gemara is quite certain that it means a new moon. In any case, so Rabbi Abba says, "Ezu chag she hachodesh mitkasebo." What's the only holiday when the moon's not visible, or at least the moon is mostly covered, the moon's a little bit visible, right after sunset. Heve Omer ze Rosh Hashanah. That I'm going to have to say the only holiday that fits that description is Rosh Hashanah, because all of the other holidays happen at times of the month when the moon is visible. Pesach and Sukkot are both at full moon. Yom Kippur is almost at a full moon. Shavuot is at quarter moon, half moon, somewhere between a quarter and a half a moon. So it has got to be Rosh Hashanah. Uchtiv, and it also says, Ki chok liYisrael hu mishpat leElohei Yaakov. I think this is the next pasuk in that same chapter, because it's a law for Yisrael and a judgment for the God of Jacob. So that connects judgment to the month, to a holiday that has something to do with the month. So now we've got Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah connected to judgment. Ma mishpat bayom af kiddush hachodesh bayom. So from there he goes to, just like the judgment of a court has to be during the day, which we saw several months ago in the Gemara. Likewise, the sanctification of the month can only be done during the day. This is where we get to the declaration of months and years as being a judicial behavior rather than a legislative behavior. And therefore it has to conform to all of the normal rules of judicial procedure, which I think we've referenced that a couple of times in the past as well, including here that it has to take place during the day. Okay, new bright. Tanu Rabbanan. Ein ma'abriat hashana b'shnei ra'avon. We do not declare a leap year in years of famine. Now, keeping in mind for a moment that I have lived my entire life in a world of internationalized agriculture and grocery stores, and in considerable comfort, I'm going to do my best to put myself into this world, but thank God it's very foreign to me, but I'll do my best. The idea here is that if the previous year's harvest was very poor, then you run out of food a lot sooner. And you're much more dependent on getting to this year's harvest as soon as possible. And the thing is, you can't eat this year's harvest until after the second day of Pesach. And so if there's any way at all that we can avoid making people wait an extra month to eat that new harvest, we're going to take it, because people in the meantime don't have food to eat. Okay, so now we need to derive this. So Tanya, Rabbi Yomer. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi quoted in a Braita says, it quotes a pasuk from Malachim Bet, from 2 Kings. V'ish ba mi bal shalisha ve'yaveh leish ha'elohim lechem bikurim esrim lechem seor. Now it's worth, let's read the bit before this, and you'll see what they mean about it being a year of famine. So we are in chapter 4. Let's go back a bit. So the Elisha Shav HaGilgala, I'm going back to Pasuk Lamed Chet. Elisha came back to Gilgal, the Hara'av Baretz, and there's a famine in the land. Uvnei HaNevi'im Yoshvim Lefanav, and there are sons of prophets, which my understanding is that means like student prophets as opposed to fully trained ones. Sitting in front of him. Vayomer l'na'aro shefot hasir hagdola. He says to his servant, boil up a big pot, uvashel nazid livnei nevi, and cook some I don't know, some stew for the student prophets. Vayetze echad el hasadeh. So somebody goes out to the field, l'lakate orot, to cut something, some kind of food. Vayimtza gefen sadeh, and he finds a wild vine. V'lakate mimenu pikuot sadeh, and he cuts some kind of wild gourds, I think these are, from this vine. Milo vigdo, enough to fill his cloak. Vayavo vayaflach el hasir hanazid kilo yadau, and he brings them and he puts them into the boiling pot because they don't know what it is. Vayitzku lanashim lechol, they serve it to the men to eat. Vayuka ochlam nazid, and they as they're eating it, vehemat tzaku, and they start screaming. Vayomru mavet basir eish Elohim, and they start yelling, there is death in the pot of the prophet. V'lo yachlu lechol, they can't eat it. Whether it tastes terrible or it's actually poisonous is not clear, but these people have been literally driven to eating wild plants they can't identify, because there's nothing else left to eat. Vayomer uklu kemach v'yashlecha hasir. So Elisha tells them, take flour and throw it into the pot. Not clear if they have flour. Vayomer tzak la'am. Then he says, serve it to the people again and let them eat it. And now it's no longer poisonous. And now it's edible. So then a guy comes, this is our pasuk that we have here, from a place called Baal Shalisha. He brings him 20 loaves of freshly harvested first fruit barley. And he says, give it to the people and let them eat. Okay. So now back in the Gemara. And somehow we know that Baal Shalisha is the place in the land of Israel where produce ripens first. I don't know where Baal Shalisha is, but it would seem that they either at least knew where it was, or at least they knew that it was a good place to go for food early in the season. So whatever it is you're going to eat, it would seem that people in Baal Shalisha have it before anyone else does. Nonetheless, it seems like the only thing available, even in Baal Shalisha at this point, is barley, which is the first thing to ripen. And lest you say that it was wheat, Talmud Lomar Se'orim. This is a very strange line. It says, in case you might think it's wheat. No, look, it says in the pasuk, barley, which is, I'm not sure why they feel the need to point that out. Shema Tomar Lifnei HaOmer, and maybe you'll tell me that in fact this is before Pesach, before the Omer sacrifice was offered. Talmud Lomar Tein La'am Ve'yochelu. But no, Elisha says, give it to the people to eat. Now you could say they're starving, but that's not the direction we're going. Instead, we're going to say Achar HaOmer Haya. So it must have been that it was after the Omer, because otherwise Elisha wouldn't have fed the new barley to everybody. And more me'ata, so let's conclude from here. If we get to right after the Omer, and the only thing available anywhere in the land of Israel is barley, and it's only available in one place, that means Pesach was too early. Pesach is supposed to happen when everybody has access to the new barley crop. So, and more me'ata ru'uya hayta utashana shitita ber. From this, we can conclude that that year really should have been a leap year, because otherwise, if we're past the Omer, there really should be barley in all of the fields. So why didn't Elisha declare it a leap year? And we're projecting backwards and assuming that whoever the religious leader is in Tanakh is, of course, going to have the same job description as the religious leaders in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, and will, of course, also be in charge of the calendar. I have no way of knowing whether or not that's true, but certainly that is what they're assuming. So why didn't Elisha make it a leap year? Because it was a famine. And everybody is running to the threshing floor. Right? As soon as there's food, everybody wants to go get it. And so from here we learn that the proper behavior is that even if it means that you're going to have Pesach and there's still going to be very little food, you still have Pesach as soon as possible, so that whatever food there is available for people to eat as soon as possible. Okay. Tanu
I have a
Rabbanan.
question about that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the Elisha was in Israel, not Yehuda.
True.
And we just talked about how when you're supposed to be in Jerusalem when you impregnate a year.
That's true. And what's more, you got to kind of wonder whether Elisha is just not in charge of the calendar because somebody else is running that show in the other kingdom. That doesn't seem to have occurred to the author of this Braita, but it might not make a difference, because it's entirely possible that this famine is across the whole area, and that the same decision is being made on the other side of the border. But you make a very good point, that in principle, it doesn't feel like Elisha and Eliyahu and the rest of the guys in the kingdom of Israel should be in charge of the calendar at all. That should be the job of the people on the other side of the border. And I'm not sure what to do with that. You're right. Okay. Our last Breita, our last discussion here, is going to have a coded message in Aramaic. Let's see if we can manage this. Tanu Rabbanan. So the last Breita says you can't add the leap month before Rosh Hashanah. They don't mean like have an extra month before Rosh Hashanah. They mean make the decision to have an extra month. You can't do that before Rosh Hashanah. And if you did, it didn't work. But in a situation where you're under pressure, you can meet immediately after Rosh Hashanah to declare the year a leap year, even though at that point you're still several months away from it making any difference. And you can't possibly know anything about the barley crop. You can't possibly know anything about the fruit crop because nothing's happened yet. Right? It hasn't even started raining yet, much less anything getting planted or growing. But I think when we talk about dichak, we're talking about pressure. I think we're talking about political pressure of the Romans might not let us convene the court again before spring variety. And you just got to just sort of muddle through and do your best. And the reason I think that's the kind of pressure we're talking about relates to the story we're about to get to. But nonetheless, no matter when you make the decision, no matter when you make the announcement, the only change you can actually make is whether or not to have an extra Adar. You can't ever add a different one. Okay, and that part we're not going to challenge. We're going to challenge the first part. Ini, is it really true that you can't meet before Rosh Hashanah? But Rava got the following coded message in Babylon. Zug Bami Reket. A pair came from Reket, and pair presumably means a pair of messengers, but probably a pair so they're witnesses that can testify to what they saw. And Reket is the old name for the city of Tiberia, which I believe at this point is where the Sanhedrin is meeting, which we'll note is in the Galil. So that, of course, references back to the previous conversation about whether you can do this in the Galil or not, but that's not our focus at the moment. Utfaso Nesher, and they were seized by an eagle, which seems to mean the Romans who used the eagle as a symbol of their military. Uviadam dvarim hanaseh beluz, and this pair was holding in their hands things that are made in luz. And of course, the Gemara takes a little tangent here and says, "Wait, wait a minute, what did they make in luz?" Umaynihu tchilet. Well, they were holding tchilet. It's not clear to me whether that means that they were carrying tchilet as a export product. And they were, bringing tchilet to Babylonia so people could make tzitzit in Babylonia, or whether it just means they're walking along and they're scared, so they're holding their tzitzit and saying, a little davening as they walk along. I'm not sure. Either way, bizchut harachamim, because of mercy, presumably divine mercy, uvizchutam, and because of their merit, the merit of the people or the merit of the tchilet, I'm not sure. Yatzu b'shalom, they got away. Not apparently so away that they don't have to send their messages in code, but they did get away. And here's the message that they were carrying. The Amuse Yeriche Nachshon, the descendants of Nachshon, Bikshu Likboa Netziv Echad. They wanted to erect a single pillar. So Nachshon, you may recall, is the the Nasi of the tribe of Yehuda at the time when Bnei Yisrael leave Egypt. The Midrash has him as the first guy who walks into the Yam Suf, even when the sea hasn't split yet. He's the one who has faith it's going to split. He walks in up to his neck and then it splits. That is not explicitly in the text of Torah, but it is. He is the Nasi of Yehuda, and he is the ancestor of King David, as opposed to the Nisi'im, people who call themselves Nisi'im of the Sanhedrin in the time of Rava, who are the descendants of King David, and therefore presumably also the descendants of Nachshon. So that the descendant of Nachshon presumably is the Nasi and his family. So they wanted to erect a pillar, and the Gemara will get to what a pillar is in a second. But that Edomite would not allow them. Edomites in the Gemara are always Romans. So it seems like the Romans are really interfering here. They interfered originally with the court proceeding, then they interfered with the messengers who were trying to deliver the coded message about it. But the assemblers assembled, and they erected a pillar in the month that Aaron the priest died. Now, Aaron died in Av, which is in the summer, which is before Rosh Hashanah. And it seems that the political situation with the Romans not wanting the Jewish court to meet, and remember, the Jewish court is, in addition to trying to set a calendar, also basically running a shadow government of a country that the Romans believe doesn't exist anymore because they've conquered it, from which they've had a fair amount of rebellion. So it's not completely wacko for the Romans to not want this court to continue meeting and legislating its own laws and calendar for people that the Romans think are Roman subjects. So it makes a certain amount of sense for the Romans to try to shut this down. In any case, in order to avoid the Romans shutting them down, they met in the summer when no one expected them to. And they erected a pillar, which seems to mean they added a month to the year. So it seems like this coded message that Rava got is an indication that the the year can in fact be declared to be a leap year in the summer before Rosh Hashanah. Obviously under exigent circumstances, but still, it sounds like it worked when they did it. So the Gemara's response to that is Chashuve machshave gluye lo maglu. Well, they made the decision. They planned what to do, but they didn't announce it. And it's the announcement that you can't do until after Rosh Hashanah. The sitting as a court and planning whether or not to do it, that apparently you can do in the summer. Okay. Then where do we get this weird code from in which a pillar is a month? My mashma dahai nitziv lishna diyarchahu. So how do we know that a pillar is a month? Dichtiv, because it says in the 4th chapter of 1 Kings, in Melachim Aleph Daled, Uli Shlomo Shnei Matzar Nitzivim Al Kol Yisrael v'Kilkalu et HaMelech v'et Anashav Chodesh Bashana. So there's this elaborate description in the 4th chapter of Melachim Aleph of the provision of food for Shlomo's court, which apparently used actually quite a lot of food. And they've got a whole system for collecting taxes from people in animals and grain and so on in order to feed the people in Yerushalayim. And so this is part of that description. It says, and Shlomo had 12 nitzivim. The word nitziv we used above to mean pillars on all of Israel. And they provided food for the king and his men 1 month a year. That's why you have 12 of them, so that each one is responsible for a month. But it says later on in the same chapter, v'nitziv echad asher ba'aretz. It says that there's only one pillar later on in the chapter. Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman, so we have Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Nachman each suggest a solution to why there's one pillar. but we've already solved our problem, which is connecting pillars to months, because the word netziv has already been used to mean somebody who's responsible for a month there, which is good enough to make it code for month in the message that Rava got. But just to round things out, what is going on with this extra 13th netziv, who's later on in the chapter? So Rav Yehuda and Rav Nachman each had a suggestion. We don't know who is who. One of them said that one of them is supervising the other 12. And that's why you have an extra one. And the other one said, nah, that the extra guy provides food in leap years for the extra month. But that last bit was primarily to explain the use of the code word of netziv to mean month. So what we end up with is that it seems like the year was actually made into a leap year in the Galilee in the summer, and it apparently worked, and they just didn't announce it until later. So it seems like we're actually operating according to all of the most lenient positions we've seen all evening. And on some things, like, for example, that it seems very unlikely that they could have known anything except the astronomy as of the summer before, we're being even more lenient than any positions we had available. It sounds like we may be operating just on the timing of the equinox, because it's hard to know what else they could have known at that point. But so in the end, when push comes to shove, it seems like we're more lenient than any of the positions we've seen tonight. But by the time we're writing this, it's hard to know for sure because all we have are stories. Okay, that's what I have for you this evening. Thank you very much. Are there more questions?
No, none from me. No more. No
Okay.
more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am planning to have class next week, even though it's President's Day. If that's a terrible idea and no one's planning to come, send me an email, let me know. I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.